I had just walked through the hotel doors when I heard her say it. Oh good, the handyman finally showed up. Not to me. About me. Just loud enough for people nearby to hear. Just quiet enough that she could pretend it wasn't meant to. The laughter that followed wasn't loud. But it was loud enough. I stopped walking. For a second I couldn't move. I was wearing my best dress shirt, the one I'd ironed twice that morning. My boots were polished. My hair was combed. I'd spent nearly an hour making sure I looked presentable for my son's engagement celebration. And somehow, at 64 years old, I suddenly felt 12. Small. Out of place. Embarrassed. The woman who made the comment was Vanessa Hartwell, my son's fiancée, and standing beside her, smiling faintly, was her mother. Neither looked remotely concerned that I'd heard every word. I glanced toward the exit. Part of me wanted to leave. No argument. No confrontation. Just walk out and save myself the humiliation. Then my son appeared. Darius moved through the crowd and stopped beside me. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad, trust me just tonight." That was all he said. No explanation, no apology. Just those 4 words. And something in his eyes made me stay. At the time, I had no idea that he was already 3 weeks into exposing the biggest deception either of us had ever faced. My name is Raymond Cobb. Most people call me Ray. I live on 32 acres outside Conroe, Texas. The land belonged to my father before it belonged to me. And everything I have today came from work. Real work. The kind that leaves scars on your hands and dirt under your fingernails. I spent more than 2 decades maintaining drilling equipment across Texas oil fields before retiring and returning full-time to the farm. It's not glamorous. Never was. But it gave my family a good life. My wife Lorraine used to say you could tell everything important about a man by how he treated people who couldn't do anything for him. She was usually right. We raised 2 children together, our daughter Simone and our son Darius. Losing Lorraine 5 years ago nearly broke me. But Darius never let me face it alone. Every weekend he'd drive out to the farm. We'd fix fences, check irrigation lines, talk about life. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch for hours saying almost nothing at all. Those were some of the best days of my life. Then 20 months ago he met Vanessa. At first everything looked perfect. She was intelligent, successful, beautiful. Her family came from money. Serious money. The kind of wealth that doesn't need to announce itself because everyone already knows. But something always bothered me. Whenever Vanessa looked at me, it felt less like she was seeing me and more like she was evaluating me, measuring me, judging me. I ignored the feeling. For Darius, because he seemed happy, because I trusted him, and because Lorraine always warned me not to confuse suspicion with proof. Then came the engagement dinner. And the handyman comment. After the event ended, Darius asked me to walk with him to his truck. We sat inside the parking garage. The doors closed. The noise faded. For nearly a minute, he said nothing. Then he unlocked his phone. A list of audio recordings filled the screen. Dates, times, more than a dozen files. "Dad," he said quietly, "what you're about to hear changes everything." Then he pressed play, and the first voice that came through the speaker was Vanessa's. "6 more weeks, Mom, then I'm in." My stomach dropped, because the tone in her voice wasn't loving. It wasn't excited. It sounded like someone discussing a business deal, and what she said next made my blood run cold. The recording lasted less than 30 seconds, but it changed everything. I sat there in the dark parking garage staring at Darius's phone while Vanessa's voice filled the truck. "6 more weeks, Mom, then I'm in." A second voice followed. Her mother. Calm, confident, and the property. Vanessa laughed softly. "Once we're married, I start working on that. Dad already has buyers lined up." I felt my stomach tighten. Property. There was only one property they cared about. Mine. The recording ended. Another began. Then another. Each one was worse than the last. For nearly an hour, Darius played evidence he'd been collecting for weeks. Private conversations, phone calls, videos, photographs. Piece by piece, the picture became impossible to deny. This wasn't a relationship. It was an operation. And my son had been the target. The land had become valuable 18 months earlier, when county officials quietly approved a future highway extension near our area. Most people didn't know about it yet, but developers did, and apparently so did Preston Hartwell. According to the recordings, Preston believed the value of my 32 acres would increase several times over once construction became public knowledge. The land wasn't sentimental to him. It wasn't family history. It wasn't generations of sacrifice. It was a future payday. And Darius was the key. If Vanessa married him, she could eventually pressure him into convincing me to sell. Or worse, use forged documents to take control entirely. Then Darius showed me something that made my blood run cold. A photograph. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary contract. Then I saw my name, my signature, my address. Everything appeared legitimate. Except I had never signed it. Not a single page. How many of these exist? I asked quietly. Darius slid another folder toward me. 7. 7 forged documents. 7 separate attempts to position themselves for ownership. I closed my eyes. For years I'd worried about droughts, market crashes, storm damage. Never once had I imagined the biggest threat to my family would arrive wearing an engagement ring. If you've ever ignored your instincts because you wanted someone you love to be happy, subscribe. Because sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we don't want to see. The next morning, Darius introduced me to Devon, a close friend who worked in audiovisual production. By then, Darius had already made his decision. The wedding wasn't going to happen. But canceling quietly wasn't enough. Not anymore, because this wasn't just about us. The evidence showed Preston had done similar things before. Different families, different properties, different victims, always the same pattern. Find valuable assets, get close, gain trust, take control, move on. The more we uncovered, the uglier it became. And for the first time, I understood why Darius wanted everything exposed publicly. People like the Hartwells survived because nobody challenged them openly. Everyone stayed polite. Everyone stayed quiet. Everyone protected appearances. That was exactly what they counted on. Over the following days, preparations continued. Devon arranged access to the wedding venue's projection system. Darius organized the recordings. Every clip was verified. Every document was authenticated. Every timeline was checked repeatedly. Nothing could be left to chance. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued acting like the perfect bride. She called Darius every evening, discussed honeymoon plans, talked about future children, future homes, future vacations. Listening to those conversations became almost unbearable, because now we knew what sat underneath every smile. Calculation. The hardest part wasn't the deception. It was watching my son carry the weight of it. Despite everything, he still loved the woman he thought she was. And losing that illusion hurt him more than he admitted. One night, while reviewing evidence at Devon's office, I finally asked him, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Darius didn't answer immediately. He stared at a paused image of Vanessa on the monitor. Then he nodded. "She wasn't just stealing from you, Dad." His voice cracked slightly. "She was stealing my future, too." For a moment, neither of us spoke, because there wasn't anything left to say. The decision had already been made. The wedding day arrived faster than I expected. Guests filled the ballroom. Music played. Photographers moved through the crowd. Everything looked perfect, exactly as the Hartwells intended. Preston walked around shaking hands like a man celebrating a victory. Claire smiled for every camera. And Vanessa stood in a gown that probably cost more than my first truck. They thought the deal was done. They thought they had won. What none of them realized was that every guest in that room was about to become a witness. And in less than 10 minutes, the most important day of Vanessa Hartwell's life was going to become the worst day she had ever experienced. The ceremony began exactly at 2 o'clock. Everything looked perfect. The flowers, the music, the smiling guests. Vanessa walked down the aisle on her father's arm, looking like she'd already won. Preston looked even happier. He wasn't watching his daughter. He was watching the future prophet he thought was only minutes away. Darius stood waiting at the altar. Calm, steady, completely unreadable. Then the officiant asked the question, "Darius Cobb, do you take Vanessa Hartwell to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The room fell silent. Every guest leaned forward, and that's when my son raised his hand. Before I answer, There's something everyone here deserves to see." Confused murmurs spread through the ballroom. Vanessa's smile disappeared instantly. The large screen behind them suddenly lit up. At first people looked annoyed, then curious, then shocked. Vanessa's voice echoed through the speakers. "Once we're married, I start working on the property situation." A second later came Preston's voice. "The moment that highway project becomes public, the land becomes worth millions." The room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Every eye turned toward the Hartwells. Clip after clip played. Secret recordings, forged documents, emails, plans. Every lie carefully laid out in front of hundreds of witnesses. Preston jumped to his feet. "This is fake." But nobody believed him. Not anymore, because the evidence kept coming. And with every minute, the truth became harder to deny. Vanessa's face had gone completely pale. For the first time since I'd met her, she had nothing to say. If you've ever been judged by people who thought money made them better than everyone else, subscribe. Because the truth has a way of leveling every room. Then Darius stepped forward. His voice never shook. "You didn't fall in love with me." He looked directly at Vanessa. "You fell in love with what you thought you could take." The silence that followed felt endless. Within minutes, police officers entered the ballroom. The celebration was over. The performance was over. And the Hartwells finally had to face the consequences of their own choices. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home, Darius and I stood beneath the pecan trees back at the farm. The same land they'd tried to steal. The same land my father had worked before me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Darius smiled. "You know, Dad, Mum would have hated that wedding." I laughed harder than I had in years. "Yeah." I looked out across the fields, glowing beneath the sunset. "She would have loved the ending, though." And for the first time in a very long time, it felt like Lorraine was smiling with us.